And welcome on into the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. George, we'll keep it very simple here. We are recording on Tuesday morning. A lot of chaos, obviously, the last few days. Let's start with this, George. Not exactly the pod we were hoping to do this week. The season's over. No playoff pod, no playoff game this weekend. The worst case scenario for this weekend happened. The Colts lost, and we are now doing a eulogy, if you will, on what was, looking back now a few days removed from the loss, a very entertaining, way better than anyone expected, but nonetheless disappointing end to the 2023 season.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. And the disappointment was palpable in the locker room after the game. It was palpable again on Monday when they were cleaning out all their lockers. You can't get this close to winning a division title and not have it hit you. I mean, I don't know any team in any sport that would walk away from that feeling happy. But at the same time, I think there are players and they're all going to have to do this on their own timetable, because for each of them, it's like anything else in life. It's going to take each of them a little bit longer in the off season to, get past this and to see the positives. But I do think you could already see it peeking through even on Monday that, a lot of them understand that the future here is pretty bright. But I also think that they realize too. I mean, Gardner told them all week long, and really the week before that, that these opportunities are fleeting. You don't get this every year in the NFL. And I think Jacksonville's a perfect example. A year ago, they finish on fire and they win the division. And you're thinking they're going to rule the AFC South for the foreseeable future. And then in the offseason, Houston and Indianapolis get really good quarterbacks. And we'll see what Tennessee's got. But I think they're in a little bit of a rebuild right now. But, we'll see how that leads. But from the time that Jacksonville won the division and had the comeback against the Chargers in the playoffs to the time the season started, the division had already changed shape. And then obviously the way the season plays out, they're the ones that collapse this year, and the Texans walk away with the title. So I don't think all of that is to say there's no guarantee. As bright as everything is, the NFL is very much what have you done for me lately? And so I think that's also part of why the disappointment is so sharp there, because they know, even though it feels like this is going to be, they're going to play in games even more important, year after year. You can't change the fact that you missed a prime opportunity on Saturday night.
And Shane, in his post-game comments, but really on his comments Monday, kind of ending the season, really did highlight that. We'll get to that more in a second here. But before we get to kind of looking back on the 2023 season, and we're going to do, by the way, a full season recap, give some awards, give our overall thoughts on what has been overall a very positive 2023 season. That pod's going to be separate. We want to kind of dedicate, more time to just the overall season. So we'll do that later this week. So keep an eye out wherever you get your pods, YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod, and also, again, wherever you do get your podcasts. A season recap will be a separate pod coming out later this week. But just in the immediate aftermath of this loss, George, it's a little bit different. And to at least highlight how we got here, right? Obviously, the big thing that happened this week was the fact that on 4th down and 3, they were in a situation where they easily could have converted on 4th down. The pass to Tyler Goodson obviously was dropped. I'm curious your thoughts, because that's still, even now as we record this on Tuesday, still a big talking point. Where do you come down on that play? Where do you come down on just how the season ended on that 4th down drop?
I don't know. I am probably in the minority in that I don't hate the play call. I understand all the arguments that are coming out of it, and they're all valid. I think that's one of the things whenever you lose like this, and it's right down to the wire, and play could be made that's not. There's always going to be valid criticisms, and I think the fact that Jonathan Taylor wasn't on the field is the most obvious one. Though I would add that, he had an ankle injury and had already run the ball 8 times on that drive. So it wasn't like he was 100%. But you're still talking about a guy who had taken over the game at that point. So I understand that completely. There's some talk about trying to throw it to a different player if you do run that play. And I think for me, I always try not to get into hypotheticals and it's just my own personal philosophy. It doesn't matter. I'm not saying anybody else is wrong for doing that. Just from my standpoint, I always just try to, because the job's hard enough as it is. I always just try to evaluate what happened, not what might have happened or what could have happened. That's why I think, the argument about putting Taylor on the field is valid. He wasn't out there. We can judge that. He could have been. That's a valid argument. But the play itself worked. The play they called worked. Steichen looked at the defensive front. He thought that play was there, and it was. And first of all, Gardner's going to make a better throw. That ball is way low and way behind Goodson. And Goodson probably has to catch that ball, even though it was a bad throw. So it's execution that we're really talking about here. Now, again, every criticism out there about, well, it should have been a different receiver. It should have been Taylor on the field. It should have been Zach Moss on the field. All that's valid. But I guess for me, where I come down is the play worked. And I think Shane's philosophy all year long has been every man on this roster counts. All 53 guys are just as important. There is nobody above anyone else. That's what got them to that point. And I think in that situation, he's just being true to himself. He's just calling a play and trusting that Tyler Goodson, who they really like, even though he only had 6 catches all year, they really like him as a back catching the ball out of the backfield. And it didn't work. And that's, to me, that was the story of the game. That not just that play, that the Colts in big moments, whether it was, Matt Gay hitting the upright on a 57-yard field goal, whether it's, some of the things they did in the red zone throughout the game, they did not execute in the biggest moments, and the Texans did. It's the difference between that play being, a poor pass that's dropped and CJ Stroud standing in the pocket and getting drilled head on and throwing a strike to Nico Collins to set up their game-winning touchdown. That, to me, is more the story of the game than the play call. But I think all the criticism's valid. For me, the play worked. They didn't execute it.
I've had a change of heart because in the immediate aftermath, my big reaction was tremendous play call, but you need to have the best player in the game. And I think, honestly, I can make an argument Jonathan Taylor just flat out on both teams was the best player of the game. I mean, 100%. Stroud was tremendous. Nico Collins had a big game, but I didn't think anyone had an impact the way JT had an impact on that game. You run the ball with him. He's moving the ball down the field. So he's your best player in the game, your best player in offense this season. With the game on the line, it's in the moment for me. I thought it was inexcusable on Shane's part to not have him on the field. Now you still fair. Right, like in the moment you watch that happen, it's like your season is on the line. It's 4th down. You already used a timeout. Like, this is the game right here. This is the season right here. I just, on the surface, to have Tyler Goodson having the ball in his hands does not make a lot of sense. Here's where my change of hearts happened. Listening to Shane postgame, listening to even Shane on Monday and hearing players talk about the play after the game, that is a play that wasn't willy-nilly, if you will. Like, Shane called the timeout, got the look he wanted, and that's a play that Shane said they repped all week. It wasn't like, hey, Tyler, we're going to throw you in here. You haven't really run this play a lot, but we're going to hope it works out. Like, by everything that I've seen, George, it was a play they practiced specifically all week. So Tyler was prepared for it. So it wasn't like they were putting him in a situation where, hey, we don't use you a lot. We're asking you to do something you haven't done a lot. We're going to throw you in cold and just hope it works. This seemed like they knew that this opportunity could present itself, and this is what they wanted to do. And honestly, I can't argue with that. And at the end of the day, it is execution. A better throw by Gardner, absolutely. But at the end of the day, like, if you're Tyler Goodson, you got to catch the ball. Just period stop. Even if he just catches it and falls down, it's a first down, and you're moving the chains, and you're now setting up to eventually, hopefully, score what would be the game-winning touchdown, an extra point. I'm going to assume, obviously, I'm not at practice. I'm going to assume during the week the play worked. I don't think Shane's
I would
calling
hope.
that play, right? Like if it's getting blown up in practice, if Goodson can't catch the ball, I'm going to assume maybe if they ran it 10 times in practice throughout the week, it worked bare minimum 9 times. And unfortunately, during the game in that moment, it didn't work. I think both Gardner Minshew, like you said, I'm with you where Gardner Minshew's guilty, need to have a better pass there, need to lead your receiver, not throw it behind him. But also Goodson just has to catch the ball. But
Mhm.
those two things, execution, I think does not eliminate what was a great play call. Like at the end of the day, if you just evaluate Shane's job as a play caller, which is call plays that work, period, stop, right? Call plays that have success. That play was going to work. And if it's a better throw, I mean, the blocking was there, George. Goodson could have taken that to the end zone. Like, there was a
There was
chance where he
chance.
could have sprung it for a touchdown. I think if you're Shane, you did everything you could have done. Dial up a play that was open that would have worked. Execution is what faltered.
Yeah, absolutely. And and to their credit, Gardner took the blame after the game. Tyler Goodson took the blame after the game. Both of them, very genuine in that too. It didn't feel like I'm just saying this because it's the moment. Goodson in particular, I think, was really gutted because he knew he had a chance to keep the season alive, and he couldn't make the play. And like you said, he's got to. I mean, it doesn't matter. Bad throw, yes. In that situation, you got to catch the ball first. I mean, that's pretty obvious. I don't think anyone's sitting here, shocked by that revelation. You got to catch that ball and extend the drive, and he knows that. I do, like I said, I think all the criticisms of Taylor not being on the field are valid. That's not hypothetical to me. That is, he wasn't out there, and he could have been. I know, like I said, there was a lot of talk after the game about him being worn down on that drive because he had 8 carries prior to that, and obviously had just come back from the ankle injury. It didn't seem like he's going to come back on the field at all. I mean that was remarkable in and of itself. I completely agree that John Taylor was player of the game. It felt like at times it felt like that Patriots game in 2021 where he was the entire Colts offense. They couldn't get anything going in the passing game. And then he just didn't get the same ending this time around. So I think you had to tip your cap to Houston. Not on that play. They didn't do anything there. They got lucky in that thing, but that's you make your own luck. And I think them executing throughout the game and overcoming 11 penalties. I mean, they had their own issues that they had to deal with. But it just felt like every time there was a big moment, you thought, okay, this third down is critical, or, this red zone possession is critical. Texans made a play, and more often than not, the Colts didn't.
That's what's frustrating with this loss too, George, even a few days removed from it, was the fact that the Texans did everything they could to give the Colts a game. Like you said, 11 penalties. A lot of those extended drives gave the Colts first down. I mean, they didn't convert a first down. They didn't convert a third down to what, midway through the fourth quarter? It was for
Mhm.
the Colts, but they still kept drives alive because on third downs, Houston would have penalties, give the Colts, a free, fresh set of downs, and missed an extra point. Like they did a lot to keep the Colts in the game. And I think to me, like, that's more frustrating because it's one thing if the Texans were a better team, just beat the Colts, came in there, were more fundamentally sound. They had the better quarterback. I think it's easier to digest. But with the penalties, with the mental mistakes, missed extra point, and the fact that the game came down to a 4th and 1, it wasn't like the Texans made a great stop. It wasn't like all game long that Colts offensive line was winning, and all of a sudden now on the play you got to have it. The Texans sold out. They got to push up front, and it was a 4th and 1, let's say, run up the middle, and they stuffed it, and they just made a great play. The play was there for the Colts to make, and they just dropped the ball, and that's what is frustrating, just in the sense of, I would say I don't think this is a homer take. Like I think if you ask any NFL fan, now watch that game that's not a Colts fan, not a Texans fan, I would argue, George, the Colts lost that game more than the Texans won it. And that's what's
Oh,
frustrating in a situation like this.
absolutely. And again, execution. And really, the thing that we're not talking about enough, I think, is a third down right before the 4th and 1 because John Taylor had a chance to pick that up and went out of bounds. And it's 4th and 1 because of that. So it's just a lot of little things like that added up where there were just, Mo Alley Cox dropped a pass early that would have kept
Yep.
a drive alive. That was perfectly thrown by
Yep.
Gardner, right down the middle. Gardner missed Mo Alley Cox wide open on a deep route by 2 or 3 inches. I mean, it happens, but it did. He didn't see Alec Pierce early in the game again when Pierce was running open down the field. And then later he did see him, but he couldn't get the ball to him. There just were a lot of those things in a game that you lose by 4. Uh, you're going to, that's always going to come back to you. You know, I think the biggest thing in my mind is that Houston had only their number 1 receiver. 2, 3, and 4 were out, and the Colts could not stop Nico Collins. I mean, he had 195 receiving yards, and he was everywhere. It just felt like every big play, Nico Collins was a part of it. So you can't let that happen. I mean, no one in the NFL is ever going to feel like, okay, we all know the ball's going to this one place, and we're not going to stop that. And that was the case. And some of that was poor coverage, and some of it was good play by Stroud and Collins. So, and some of it was luck. I mean, the play where he just kind of throws the ball up on 3rd down or 2nd down, 2nd and 14, and Collins runs under it. You know, again, that's the Texans making their own luck. They gave themselves a chance to make a play, and they did. And I think that's why this one, besides the stakes and besides what happened on Sunday when Tennessee upset the Jaguars, that's why this one's going to linger as long as it does, because the Colts know they absolutely had a chance to win that game and did not deliver.
Should be still continue to play and should be hosting a home playoff game, which again, you see the Jaguars result. It hurts even more that not only do you win and you're in the playoffs, you'd be hosting the Browns and having a chance at revenge at what was the most controversial and maybe the most painful loss of the season with how the game ended against Cleveland. You have a shot at redemption if you win that game on what probably would have been the Saturday early game. I think that's the AFC South special there. That's definitely the Texans special. 4:30 playoff wild card weekend start on Saturday. But that could have been and should have been the Colts, which is very frustrating.
Should I mention that had that game gone the Colts way, they would be in the playoffs right now.
Right.
They would be tied with Pittsburgh and they would have the tiebreaker. So had they got that W against Cleveland, they would be, even with a loss to Houston, they'd still be regretting not winning the division, but they would be headed to Buffalo. So, I mean, that's how tight the margin is in the NFL. And I think that's something that they need to remember for next year. I mean, you can go back to laying an egg in Cincinnati, laying an egg in Atlanta, not executing at the end here, but that Cleveland game is going to stick in a lot of people's craw for a lot of reason. And reverse that outcome, Indianapolis is in the playoffs today.
There's, 10 moments, 10 games, 10 plays we can look at and say, if one goes their way, you're 100% right. We're talking about the season going on, and we're doing a playoff preview versus a season eulogy. You are 100% right about that. But that's why I liked what Shane said on Monday, more, a little bit removed from the game. He said 2 things that I really liked. He said, number one, tough times don't last, tough people do. This is painful. This is really obviously a tough loss, but that's 100% the mindset you have to have of this sucks right now. But if we learn from it, if we get better, we're going to be here for the long haul. And that brings you to the other thing I like too, George, which was again, we'll do our season preview a little bit later in the week to kind of fully, finish off the 2023 year, put a bow on it. But what I like is there's a lot of obviously positives to take out of this. And I think as fans, and maybe even media too, overall football think, it is easy to say, oh, well, you finished strong. Like, what a great year 2023 was, considering you missed your quarterback for, or you had Gardner make 13 starts and you had your quarterback just finish 1 game all season long. Like, you go 9-8. Well, you get AR back. Well, all of a sudden you can do the math, 10, 11, 12 wins. Like, it's easy to just say, oh, you plug one guy in. Of course, you're going to pick up right where the season left off. I like the fact that Shane was said it multiple times and almost defiant of 2024 is going to be a new year. Like, you finished strong and overall is a good year in 2023. But like you brought up earlier with the Jaguars, there is no guarantee, and there really rarely is ever any carryover from one year to the next. And I like the fact that he had that perspective already, because I think it's easy to sit back and say, oh, great year. Like, feel good about yourself, feel good going to the off season. But at least to me, George, it already sounds like Shane is not only thinking about 2024, but he's thinking about 2024 with not a lot of carryover from 2023, which I think is the right mindset, because it truly is. It's a cliche, but it's true. Every year in the NFL is a totally different season. and there's rarely any carryover from one year to the next.
And this team's gonna change a lot. I mean, it's one of the other things that he and the guys in the locker room, acknowledged. You always would love to bring every free agent back. Every team, talks about it, but reality is that's not going to happen. There's going to be people who go out the door. There's going to be new people coming in. And that chemistry is important. That's what Shane was talking about. You've got to, start over in April when they get back together and rebuild this thing again from the ground up. And I think it is good that the head coach is already in that mindset. I'm not surprised because that's who he is. I think it helps that you've got buy-in already from a lot of guys on this team. I mean, the way that Jonathan Taylor defended Steichen after the game, and just being adamant about, hey, you can't question this guy, what he's done, and again on Monday, where he said, basically that your goal in the NFL is to give yourself a chance to win in the fourth quarter, and that until the final gun sounds, you still have a chance to win. He says, especially with Shane. I mean, his belief in the head coach is through the roof. And I think you see it from DeForest Buckner, you see it from Zaire Franklin, you see it from several other guys on offense. Michael Pittman was talking about how much fun this year was for him, and he'll obviously be one of the top free agents, probably the top free agent. But that's the thing. It's going to change. The locker room's going to be different. The schedule's different. The way other teams look at and prepare for the Colts is going to be different. But they understand that. And I think, they're ready for whatever the new challenge brings with it. I thought the one thing, Shane wrapped it all up by saying he really believes that they're on the cusp of something special here. And I think that's the other thing that the locker room has bought into. I think you go to every guy in there right now and they feel like, Anthony Richardson's going to be a special quarterback. Gardner Minshew reiterated that again on Monday. They feel like this young defense is just going to get better the more time it has together and the more it gels. And they feel like this was just the beginning. But yeah, in the NFL, none of that matters. You still got to go out. Everybody's going to be 0-0 here in a couple weeks again. And you got to start again from square one in April and rebuild this thing.
And that's why I love that mindset, because you're right. Like, there's a lot of reason to believe, and a lot of players, like you said, like this is obvious. I don't think I have to say it, but the tone this time, a few days ago at the locker room cleanout versus this time last year at the locker room cleanout, the tone, the belief level couldn't be, any more different. Couldn't be any further on the each side of the spectrum there. But it's the belief is there, obviously. And I think Shane is done just in his whole body work. He has done everything for every single player on that roster, and even players on other teams that want to come here. There's every reason to believe the head coach is the right one going forward. But like you said, it's also maintaining that mentality of, well, just because we did this last year doesn't mean it's going to carry over to next year. Like, I would argue, part of the reason why the Jaguars collapsed is I think they thought, oh, we're going to just pick up where we left off. And once adversity hit, they didn't really know how to fix it. The Eagles, I think same thing. I think they assumed, oh, we're just going to roll right through the NFL again like we did last year. And you start 10-1, and all of a sudden now they're in a free fall. I think in part because they don't know how to fix things, or just assume it's, oh, we're going to have the same success as last year, and are maybe even mentally not coping with the fact that things are more difficult. And so if you have that mindset going into 2024 of 2023 was great, and we have a lot of reasons to believe, and we built a nice foundation. But you have to assume, like you said, like the Colts are not sneaking up on anyone. You could argue maybe some of their wins were just teams taking them lightly of, oh, this team won 4 games last year. They're a total mess. Backup quarterback. Like, there's a lot of reasons to overlook this team, even as they were playing well and playing into a playoff spot. They're sneaking up on no one next year. And now teams have the book on Shane and how he coaches offense and what he likes to do and his tendencies. And so now, teams are going to be more prepared and circle the Colts next year. So that's, again, going to be a more difficult challenge when there's more information on you and teams are going to be better prepared. You see it all the time in the NFL, right? One player has a big breakout year, or one offense has a big breakout year, and the next it's tougher because all off season, teams study the tendencies, teams figure out schemes to slow them down, and it's nowhere near as easy as maybe a big breakout year was. And that's going to be obviously very important for the Colts to remember going to 2024, even though they're going to have basically a brand new offense, right? With Anthony Richardson coming back and hopefully staying healthy for a majority, if not all of the 2024 season, it's still going to be a lot more challenging for this team without a doubt. And one thing that's going to be a big question, George, going forward here is going to be defensively, what does this team look like? And that's going to start with the defensive coordinator in the future of Gus Bradley. Now, as everyone is well aware at this point, Shane Steichen does not answer questions directly, nor does he give you any sort of hint at what he's actually thinking. So when he was asked about the future of Gus Bradley, he put it very simple and very plain, very bluntly. I'm a coach, or I'm a fan of continuity. I mean, I'm going to assume here, George, you tell me. That basically says Gus is back in 2024.
That was like a glowing recommendation from Shane Steichen. I mean, he also said he has a ton of respect for Gus and mentioned that they had worked together with the Chargers. And that was my question all along. I always felt like, and we talked about it, we always thought the defense was going to have some rough times this year. I mean, one of the reasons both of us picked this team to do so poorly was that you weren't sure where the pass rush was going to come from. And they found that answer. They answered that emphatically. 51 sacks, the most since the Indianapolis era for this franchise in a single season. Didn't have that one game record guy, and I still think that'd be nice to add. But what they did as a group is outstanding. But that secondary, they had their moments, even in the loss on a Saturday night, at the start of the game, literally first play for the Texans, you had, a free runner. Excuse me. It's that time of year.
I see.
You had a free runner, that no one's able to check him. He ran past the defense. Nico Collins, a 75-yard touchdown to start the game. But you knew those things were going to happen. And in addition to it being a young team that you were worried about in the secondary to begin with, they lost guys left and right through the year. I mean, you lost what, 2 or 3 corners. You lost a safety. You lost for a while there. I think Kenny Moore missed a game. It was just it was always going to be tough on the back end. And I think that's something. So from that standpoint, I never thought that would be the reason Gus Bradley was gone. I think they understood how tough he had, but we talked about it. I think we talked about it in the last post game. We talked about it several times, over the year. The question was always Shane's philosophy, because he didn't hire Gus technically. He was already in place when he got here. And so is he going to want to move on? Is he going to want a different style of defense? And I think Shane answered pretty emphatically for him on Monday that's not the case. So I would expect Gus Bradley to be back now. Defense has to improve. There's no question about it. And I think one of the big questions going into this offseason, and we'll get into this more in later pods, but I think one of the biggest questions coming into the offseason is Chris Ballard going to do what it takes to add to that secondary, no matter who the defense coordinator is, no matter what the philosophy is. Is he going to go get a veteran cornerback? Is he going to add, a playmaker at safety? Is he got the stomach for that? Remains to be seen.
You're right. And I think a lot of questions about the defense is going to come down more to Chris Ballard than who's going to be the DC. But Gus Bradley is obviously a very polarizing figure for the fan base in terms of wanting him back versus keeping him. I think Shane's doing the right move. I want Gus Bradley back, and I think bringing him back is the right move for this team for a few reasons. Number one, like you said a franchise record with sacks. That's not something we can overlook or ignore or not give him credit for. And they also set a single season sack record with an awful, inexperienced, not awful, that's maybe too strong, with a very inexperienced and at times very leaky secondary. So you got to think too, it's easier than, like, my hope is that it was for quarterbacks to complete passes, this was the easiest year it's going to be, that they're only going to improve. And you got to assume with Juju Brents hopefully staying healthier and obviously getting more experience under his belt, Jalen Jones getting a lot of experience under his belt, Darrell Baker Jr. playing a lot, a ton of snaps this year. Like, this was a very inexperienced and young secondary. And so you would assume like that, if anything, quarterbacks would get the ball out faster and it'd be a lot easier for them to have a lot of success. And still, with that said, with a secondary that had at times really struggled to cover receivers, you still had this defensive line get the record And I like the fact that there was a lot of depth too. 4 guys with at least 7 sacks. No other team in the NFL has had that. And I think that shows like when you have multiple guys producing for you, I think it is harder to slow down compared to having just, like I say, a TJ Watt or a Myles Garrett. Very disruptive players, very tough to defend and slow down. But for the Colts, like having 4 guys on that D line that at any point can win a one-on-one battle and get a sack, I think is huge. So that's, I think, number one. You got to give Gus a lot of credit for that. And also, too, like, you got to realize what he's working with. Like, again, like we're talking about at times we had 2 rookies to start. Well, it was a playoff game on Saturday night. You had 2 rookies on the outside starting. And then when Juju went down, you had Darrell Baker Jr. come in, who's had like basically no experience before this year at corner. So you can basically chalk him as a rookie on the outside. So it's like the depth there. Anytime someone got hurt, all you're doing is plugging in basically a less experienced player to fill in for already an inexperienced defensive back. They're playing one of the hardest positions in the NFL with 2 safeties, by the way, that are or 3 safeties really that rotated in that are also inexperienced themselves. I mean, Julian Blackmon has played a good amount of football, but still, that's a guy that's still on his first contract. So it's not like he's been in the league 7-8 years that kind of, has seen it all. This is a very inexperienced secondary that I'm going to assume that is only going to get better in 2024 after going through some bumps in 2023. I think Gus deserves to see the other side of getting through a year with one of the worst secondaries on paper in the NFL and having a chance to build on that with guys getting more experience. So I know he was a lot of fans are upset with his cautious nature, we'll say, not blitzing a lot and sitting back and letting teams, dice up the secondary. It seems like with Shane's comments that Gus is coming back, I think it's the right move.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way. And I think, you got to look at the deeper numbers too. I mean, in terms of DVOA, no one's going to be writing home, love letters for this defense, but they were 18th, which is lower middle class. The Texans were 17th. So it's not like, they were right there with Houston's defense. And obviously, there's a lot of things to fix. There's no question about it. I think I know they've got to disguise some things more pre-snap. It's a little bit too easy for opposing quarterbacks. Secondary in general, I think a lot of this offseason in my mind should be devoted to the passing games on both sides of the ball. That's where they've got to get better. So anything, when it comes to the draft, anything that helps defend the pass or helps them throw the ball better should be at the top of the list for me. And it should be that way in free agency as well. I mean, to me, when you're looking at who you want to re-sign and you're looking at who you want to bring in from other players, that's all of that to me should be predicated on the passing game, both sides of the ball. They've got to shore up things on the back end, and we'll see how that goes. Them being more experienced will certainly help. We'll see what personnel changes happen there. But also, I think especially the biggest argument for Bradley to me is that was not a 1-year thing up front. 2 of the 3 top sack seasons in franchise history since the game to Indianapolis are the 2 years Gus Bradley was here. They were 3rd last year. Well, they were 2nd last year, 3rd now because of this year. That wasn't a fluke. They did it, back-to-back years. So that's the number one thing is getting after quarterbacks. I think you see, where I think the reason why you need the game record is, well, I think they had 5 sacks in the last 3 games. With season on the line, they couldn't get to Stroud enough. They couldn't affect him enough on Saturday night. And like you said, some of that could be affected if the secondary, can play a little bit tighter and can be involved. But I do think there's room to bring in everybody wants that TJ Watt style, pass rusher. That's easy to say. I think the fact that they got it done to the extent they did without a guy like that says something for this defensive staff.
And I know, again, Ballard gets, criticized a lot for not spending money. The Colts do have the 4th most cap space going into 2024, about $72 million. So obviously some of that's going to be spent on keeping guys here and re-signing your own players. but there is a lot of flexibility cap wise to make a splash. Like you said, either on the defensive line, in the secondary, bringing a corner in, like there is flexibility for the Colts to make a move here to bring hopefully what is a game wrecker or a pass stopper, if you will, on the defensive line or the secondary to kind of really bolster this defense. But to like overall, I think if we like when we talked about it in August, right? Like you said, part of the reason why we picked 4 and 5 games for this Colts team to win respectively was the fact that yeah, you have a rookie quarterback, but also you are going with a super inexperienced secondary that is not the recipe for success. Now they got lucky in the sense that it's not like they played murderer's row of quarterbacks. They didn't play Patrick Mahomes. You didn't play Joe Burrow. You didn't play Josh Allen. So like they caught a break in the sense that the competition they played was not exactly the best they could have played. But with that said, I think all things considered, George, if we just kind of quickly at least take a 10,000 foot view just on the secondary, I would say they played pretty well, all things considered, this year with where our expectations were in August, now sitting here in January.
Yeah, I mean, I think the defense exceeded my expectations from coming in, and it's part of the why the team finished much better than I expected them to. So it's definitely one of those things that, again, all the criticism is fair. I mean, they've got to disguise things better. There's no question about that. I don't know if they have to blitz more. I don't know how much I would blitz with these young corners. I mean, that's part of the problem. When you see what happens when they're kind of singled up like Juju was on the first play of the game, it's not going to end well more often than not.
Right.
They're just not, they don't have the experience to do that yet. A few years from now, they both have the promise of it. There's no question about it. A few years from now, yeah, you might be able to do more of that. But right now, I think that's not a great idea. And that's what makes me laugh because everybody yells about, oh, he's in zone all the time. Well, he's not. He's not in zone as much as everybody thinks he is. And they weren't in zone on the play that started the whole game for Houston. It's not like every time something bad happens, it's because they were sitting back. They've been burnt before by being aggressive too. So there's a lot that needs to be fixed. There's no question about that. You're not going to see a total philosophy change. That's not going to happen. That's when you would bring in a new defense coordinator. Obviously, Shane doesn't think that that's necessary, or he would, have a different opinion right now. So I think, yeah, a lot of it is guys getting their experience, being another year older, and I don't think they're going to spend big outside the walls. For one, they just never really have. But two, there's so many guys that they need to pay within their own building that I think that's going to be the focal point of free agency. I mean, right now I'll just go ahead and spoil some of the offseason talk for me. It would be extremely negligent to let Michael Pittman Jr. walk because you need him. Yeah, I don't know how you say you're doing everything you can to support your young quarterback if you let him go out the door. So, that right there is probably your big contract. And then after that, you're going to try to bring back as many of the other guys as you can. And then, the key, I think, is finding the Samson Ebicams out there again. That was one of the bigger signings of the offseason. Can you find the defensive secondary version of him? Can you bring that guy in? We'll see. We'll see where that goes. But I just every criticism of this defense has been fair. I think Gus Bradley would tell you that there's a lot that they need to improve on. But I do think at the end of the day, if you look at what you could reasonably expect from this unit at the beginning of the year to what they gave you and everything they went through, they exceeded expectations.
I agree. And you have to think they are on a trajectory that's only going to improve in 2024. If we're talking about a defense that remains the same or takes a step back next year, different conversation. But I think when you consider the expectations, again, back in the preseason and training camp versus now the finished product after 17 games, I'm with you. I think they bare minimum played to expectation. I would say they played for the most part overall better than I would have thought. And even like also too, you got to realize some games they got torched and some games like the Falcons game couldn't stop anyone. Browns game had trouble slowing down PJ Walker. New Orleans letting that offense get hot for really one of the only times it did this season for the Saints. There were absolutely some games that were just throw it away ugliness. But if you also take into consideration the Colts on the offensive end, playing with Gardner Minshew and having a limited offense, the defense, for the most part, kept this team with a backup quarterback in the game. Did they win every game themselves? Absolutely not. But did they do a good enough job of keeping an offense with a backup quarterback in the game? Absolutely. I think for this year, that's what you got to ask for. And I think going into next year, there's a reason to believe it can get better with experience, with some additions as well, trade-wise, draft-wise, free agency-wise, to patch up some maybe lack of experience in the secondary. There are obviously ways to improve the roster. That's going to be on Chris Ballard more than it is Gus Bradley. But there's a reason to believe, I think, that Gus in 2024 will have this defense better prepared and just overall better next year compared to what we saw so far in this year. Like, it's trending in the right direction, which I think is a reason to bring him back. And I think there's a reason to believe that this can improve versus, oh, this is the best they're going to do. It wasn't good. Let's move on. Or like you said, let's have a philosophy change overall and just rip up the defense completely. I think what we saw this year, there's a reason for optimism defensively in 2024. You brought up the big question and something I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot this offseason, the future of Michael Pittman Jr. Now, we got a little bit of insight on Monday into his at least overall philosophy, and that is the fact that he is going to test free agency. He wants to see what his market is, which is obviously fair. He's never done this, and you have a big year. You want to be able to get your worth, whether it's in Indy or elsewhere. You want to get the money that you think you are owed. So there's going to be no hometown discount, which I can't fault him for. And he highlighted that he wants to go to a team that is really the right fit, that highlights his skill set. I mean, George, like you said, I think it's malpractice for the Colts to let him go and not match the offer. But also, if you're Michael Pittman Jr., assuming the Colts give you the money that you think you deserve, and other teams are bare minimum offering you, I think right now, with what we saw in 2023, especially the second half of the year, a team that perfectly fits the skill set of Pittman, I think it's right here in Indy.
I mean, I know how important he is. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, it's sort of like Jack Doyle used to be in terms of so many things that they run offensively run through him. I think Gardner mentioned on Monday that, sometimes he's like a hybrid tight end because he's asked to block as much as he is, and he does a really good job in that role. And then obviously on top of that, he caught 100 balls, went over 1,000 yards. It'll be interesting to see, how things play out. Gut feeling, I think at the very least they're going to hit him with franchise tag. And I know everybody says, "Well, Ballard's never used franchise tag." Who was he going to use it on? I don't really put much, stock in the fact that they haven't used it in the time that he's been here. He hasn't needed to. It wasn't an option with Jonathan Taylor last year. He wasn't out of contract.
Right.
And up until then, there hasn't. I can't really think of a time when it was like, oh, they better franchise tag this free agent that's coming up. This is the first time, and because everybody else was taken care of before, and this might be too, but everybody else was taken care of before it got to this point. So, and Ballard said, I think during one of the 4,000 Jonathan Taylor press conferences we did this year before the contract got signed, that the franchise tag is a tool, and why would he not use any tool that's at his disposal? And I thought, Pittman was typically pretty entertaining and pretty open and honest about that, where he said, look, I'm not going to jump for joy if I get tagged, but it's $23 million and not gonna not sneeze at that either. And you could still work out a long-term deal. I think that's probably the best option here. If you don't get something done before that, simply because it means he's not going anywhere, obviously. And it does give you that time to work things out. I just think, could he find a better fit? I don't know, because I don't know exactly what he's looking for. But I don't think the Colts can find a better fit for them in everything that they want him to do. So, you got to get it done. That's my bottom line. You got to get it done.
I'm with you. I mean, it's one game, but you go back to that Falcons game and just how lost the offense was. Without Pittman there was no reliable receiver you can lean on, especially on third downs. Gardner had happy feet again, especially with the run game not getting established. There was no threat in the passing game whatsoever. And again, you look at, you mentioned earlier, I think you're 100% right. You can't tell Richardson, hey, we're going to do everything we can to make sure, you're in a good spot here in 2024, and then let Pitt walk. But like, even if you think he's overpriced, you got to at least bare minimum match that contract. They said use the franchise tag, whatever it takes to keep him bare minimum as a Colt in 2024. You owe it to your now going to be a second year quarterback in AR to make sure that MPJ is out there, because he is a very reliable receiver. He is a threat that defenses have to worry about at all times, which opens up other opportunities for downs, for peers, for the tight ends. He is a problem. And like you said, right now, if Pittman is off the roster, I mean, there is no obvious guy in free agency, no obvious guy you could trade for to bring in. Like, T. Higgins is a nice player. Are you going to shell out $25 million to bring T. Higgins in? With Chris Ballard's history of free agent spending, that answer is no. And so I think you bare minimum owe it to AR to keep Pittman on the roster. And like you said, I don't understand the vision or the plan going forward if you think your offense, your passing offense, will be A-okay without number 11 there.
No, and it's going to be a big contract. I mean, everybody be prepared for that. It's going to be top of the market deal. I mean, he's not going
25
to
a year.
It's going to be at least 24. I mean, it's going to be right up there, I imagine, because that's what he's going to be able to demand, and that's what you got to pay, And so I'm sure there'll be criticism if the deal gets done, and there'll be a lot more if the deal doesn't get done. It's one of those things where I think they just got to swallow hard and do it. And I know, it's not, look, from the books and everything else, people are going to say, well, is he worth it? To this team, he absolutely is. I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, everything that he does, in addition to catching the football, he absolutely is. All you got to do is go back to the Atlanta game when we went out there and see how much fun that is, and how much you want to go through that again. And obviously things are gonna be different with Richardson back there. But I don't know how you look, like I said, I don't know how you look Richardson in the eye and say, we're doing everything to help you succeed, but we're not going to re-sign the clearly best receiver on the roster.
Also, they don't have a Patrick Mahomes contract on the books.
No.
They got a rookie quarterback going to year number 2. This is the time you pay everyone else first. And then this is the flexibility. This is the most money, most cap space the Colts are probably going to have for a while, because if AR continues to develop the way we hope and think he is, you're paying them 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and now it may not kick in for maybe a year or two after that. We've seen plenty of extensions start once that 5-year rookie contract ends. But again, it's only going to get harder to keep guys on the roster, let's say 3 or 4 years from now. This is the time where you blow it out. And if you got to spend $25 million a year to pay Michael Pittman Jr., you do it, because that, you take advantage of right now AR being the cheapest he'll ever be in his career. This is the time you spend.
And like you said, I mean, that's the cost of a top receiver. That's the math to me is, do you want to pay $25 million for the guy fits your offense, the guy has a relationship with your quarterback, the guy is a good leader in the locker room, and everything that you've got that's a known quantity with Pittman? Or do you want to pay $25? $25, you do that for sure.
Yeah.
You want to pay $25 million for somebody coming from another, situation that you don't know, and that they, at least on some level, decided wasn't worth that cost.
Right. I couldn't agree more. And I think it just, like I said, there's not an excuse or a reason I see right now as to why Pittman, like how you can validate Pittman not being on this roster in 2024. You have the financial flexibility. You owe it to essentially, it basically is still a rookie quarterback, if you will, with the lack of game experience he has this year. You owe it to AR, you owe it to the offense to make sure Pittman is back next year. I'm with you. There's nothing Ballard could say to reason that I would understand and agree with if they let him walk this offseason. Couldn't agree more. I'll also talk a lot more about that as the offseason does continue. But one thing, George, I want to leave off this pod, at least kind of just highlighting maybe the locker clean out, kind of wrapping up, putting on a boa of week 18. I love the DeForest Buckner's comments about Shane Steichen. And again, I think it shows just the overall belief and the dichotomy of this time last year versus this time this year of where this team is going forward, and how much more they are locked in and believing that they have a bright future. Just to read the exact quote that Buck told the media on Monday in regards to his head coach, Shane Steichen. He said, quote, "The culture change was a big thing for me. You need the right coach each and every week to compete. I feel like the week prior, we would go, or I feel like the year prior, I should say, we would go into weeks where guys didn't have the right mindset. This year, I didn't feel that at all," end quote. Again, there was no doubt, George, I think maybe midway through the year that, oh, the Colts got the right guy. But hearing a guy of Buckner who was in a great organization with the 49ers, went to a Super Bowl with them, was there for just that forgettable 2022 season, to hear a veteran who has seen both sides of the coin of really good cultures and really good teams and really poor cultures and really bad teams. Again, there was never a doubt, but that I think speaks volumes from a player of his stature and leadership. Shane has won over this locker room, and he did it in a fashion, George, that I honestly thought was a lot quicker than I ever expected.
Yeah, I mean, I remember we were talking, in the preseason, about can he, what would happen if they didn't draft a quarterback? Can he set his foundation without the quarterback in place? And I know I said no, and
Same.
I think you were sort of like a little bit more towards the middle, but still negative on that. And it's basically what happened. They did draft a quarterback, but he didn't play, the vast majority of the year. And there's no question he set the foundation. There's no question about it. The standard that he wanted is there now. Like you said, I think it's really telling that his philosophy isn't to take a victory lap for that. It's to get ready to set it again next year, which I think is important. Also, it probably didn't get out as much because it wasn't as big of a scrum, but Bernard Ryman, I thought, he was kind of going into a little bit of details about just, how all the coaches had helped him. And he said Shane's insistence on detail and his, I guess, giving that knowledge to players down to like on an RPO, telling them how many seconds it's going to take for the ball to get out. That kind of thing, I think, is something that, I'm sure there's probably coaches doing that all over. But it's, as a player, you can tell they really respect that he's got their best interest at heart. He's trying to put them in the best position, and he's giving them every bit of info he can, so that they can succeed on Sunday. And that's all I can ask for from a coach. And you can tell, there's not a single guy in that locker room right now, I feel like, who isn't completely bought in. And we wondered that. We talked about that a lot in the preseason and the lead up to all this is, can he, because not every coach can do that. Can he be that guy that wins everyone over? You say whatever you want about the rest of the year, whether you're happy with the result, whether you're frustrated, whether you see a bright future, whether you don't. The one thing that's absolutely undeniable is that this team played hard for Shane Steichen and that they are 100% bought into his philosophy and what he wants to get done here in Indy.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I was just going to bring it up. Like the Colts, obviously, like they got blown out in a few games. I think you can argue the execution was the biggest flaw there, but I can't recall off the top of my head, George, a game in which they mailed it in, where they were not ready to play, where they were not prepared. You hear that from a lot of teams, and you see it. Like, I mean, Trevor Lawrence has talked about it basically, like, feels like the guys go into some games and just aren't prepared and don't know what the game plan is. I don't think we ever saw that from this Colts team. Plenty of games they didn't execute. That's a totally different conversation. And again, looking at this team and looking at the future, I think it's safe to say, and at least hopefully this is the case, this is the least talented team Shane Steichen's going to have for a while. So you got to think bare minimum execution is going to improve once you get your first round quarterback back, once you hopefully make some additions, tweak the roster a little bit and make some, improvements now that you kind of have an identity for this team. You can find players that fit what you're trying to do offensively and defensively. This should be, at least on paper, the least talented team Shane will have in his hopefully long tenure here in Indy. And so execution is going to improve, but it never felt like they mailed it in. Never felt like they were just outcoached or outclassed, or they just quit on the team. And we are experts in knowing what a quitting team looks like after last year's second half of the season. And that's a huge testament to the culture Shane has built. And again, just so impressive where so many guys were on that team last year, right? It's easy, I think, if you turn the roster over and not a lot of guys are there to experience what was just an embarrassing finish to the season. You had a lot of guys on this team that were there last year. And so I think it's easy to be skeptical, be slow to buy in because you're being fed all this BS. And it's like, listen, dude, like we were a laughing stock last year. Like, let's just pump the brakes here. But like you said, the attention to detail, the belief he was able to galvanize his guys, like it happened right away. It wasn't like week 9, the switch flipped and all of a sudden guys were like, oh, this guy's like pretty good. Maybe I trust him. Like they played hard and they played fast for their coach ASAP. And I think that, again, just highlights bare minimum. We talked about 2023 back in the preseason, right? The only thing that matters was AR's development. Obviously, that went out the window after week number 5. But with that said, I think you definitely saw this buy-in from this team. And I think without a doubt, George, the Colts could definitely say they have one of the better head coaches in the league. And they absolutely, for how at times grueling it felt like that head coach search was last year, it was all worth it. They got the right guy. No ifs, ands, or buts.
They did, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of talk in the offseason about how they're going to continue to shape this roster in Shane Steichen's image. But, no guarantees. We talked about that right at the top. You don't start next year where you finish this year. But I think the reason for optimism, it probably starts with Anthony Richardson. And then number 2 on the list is Shane Steichen.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt, you're 100% right about that. And it should be definitely a lot more positive of an off season for our pods to come than a lot of the questions that we had this time last year, without a doubt. So we'll still kind of give you some more reaction to the 2023 season. Again, we have a season preview, or not a season preview. What am I talking about? We got a lot of time for that. A season recap. Players of the year, offensive player of the year, defensive player of the year, most improved. We'll give you a lot of superlatives, kind of put one last bow on the 2023 season before we start to look out towards the 2024 season, just to give you a peek behind the curtain. That will come out later this week. The date, though, is TBD. We're going to try to do it after Chris Ballard and Anthony Richardson meet the media, to kind of include their quotes and their perspective as well in that pod. So right now, George, right, we don't have a set date for that. Could happen Wednesday, could happen Thursday, but right now up in the air.
Yep, still up in the air right now, but it will be happening eventually. Could be next week. You never know for sure. So, but it is going to happen at some point in the near future.
So once those two gentlemen do speak, we will give you a season recap. So make sure now more than ever, time to subscribe on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod. Same name wherever you do get your podcasts, Blue Horseshoe Pod. Subscribe, like, tell your friends about us as well. We will give you a one last look, over a 10,000-foot view, if you will, on what was now a few days removed from the loss, a very entertaining and a way better than expected season for the 2023 Indianapolis Colts. So have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you soon right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.